on Mad World. Both sides are close to turning the world into a wasteland.
The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
October 1962. The world stood on the edge of annihilation. For 13 agonizing days, two superpowers played a game of nuclear chicken that could have ended civilization as we know it. This is the story of how close we came to World War III and how humanity somehow survived. Imagine waking up one morning, going about your normal routine, completely unaware that in secret rooms thousands of miles away, military commanders were preparing for nuclear war. That was the reality for millions of Americans in October 1962. While children practiced duck-and-cover drills in schools and families built fallout shelters in their backyards, President John F. Kennedy and Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev were locked in the most dangerous standoff in human history. The stakes? The survival of the human race. On the morning of October 14, 1962, a U-2 spy plane soared over Cuba at 70,000 feet. Major Richard Hazer was on a routine reconnaissance mission, but what his cameras captured would change everything. When intelligence analysts developed the film back in Washington, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Soviet nuclear missiles, capable of reaching most of the United States, being installed just 90 miles from Florida. For President Kennedy, this was a nightmare scenario. The missiles could strike Washington, New York, or any major American city with virtually no warning. Millions could die in minutes. The delicate balance of power that had kept the Cold War from turning hot was suddenly, catastrophically disrupted. Kennedy faced an impossible decision. He immediately assembled a team of his closest advisors, a group that would become known as ExComm, the Executive Committee of the National Security Council. But here's what made this crisis so terrifying. They had to keep it secret. If the American public learned that Soviet nuclear weapons were pointed at them from Cuba, panic would spread. If Khrushchev knew they'd been discovered too soon, he might launch a preemptive strike. So while Americans went about their daily lives, watching TV, going to work, playing in parks, the president and his team met in secret wargaming scenarios that could end in nuclear holocaust. In the windowless rooms of the White House, Kennedy's advisors debated their options. The military leaders wanted immediate action. General Curtis LeMay, the Air Force Chief of Staff, pushed hard for airstrikes to destroy the missile sites. "We should knock them out," he argued, his voice filled with certainty. But Kennedy knew it wasn't that simple. Intelligence suggested there were about 40,000 Soviet troops in Cuba, far more than anyone had estimated. An airstrike might not destroy all the missiles. And what then? Would the Soviets retaliate? Would Khrushchev have no choice but to respond with nuclear weapons to save face? Defense Secretary Robert McNamara proposed a different approach, a naval blockade. The U.S. Navy would surround Cuba and prevent any more Soviet ships from delivering missiles or equipment. It was less aggressive than an airstrike, but it was still an act of war. Ships would be stopped, boarded, turned around. It was a middle ground, but in nuclear chess, there are no safe moves. Kennedy's brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, became a key voice for caution. He reminded the room of Pearl Harbor how America had been attacked without warning. "We're not going to be the ones to start World War III," he insisted. By October 22nd, the secret couldn't be kept any longer. Kennedy addressed the nation on television, his face grave as he explained the situation to 100 million shocked Americans. He announced the quarantine of Cuba a blockade in everything but name. The military went to DEFCON 2, the highest state of readiness before nuclear war. Strategic bombers loaded with nuclear weapons took to the skies, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Around the world, people watched in horror. This was it. The moment everyone had feared since the atomic age began. October 24th, Soviet ships approached the quarantine line. American destroyers waited, their crews tense, fingers near triggers. Would the Soviet captains turn back, or would they try to break through? If American ships fired on Soviet vessels, there would be no going back. The world held its breath. Then, incredibly, the Soviet ships stopped. They turned around. Secretary of State Dean Rusk whispered to National Security Advisor George Bundy, "We re-eyeball to eyeball." And I think the other fellow just blinked. But the crisis was far from over. The missiles already in Cuba remained operational. Soviet technicians worked around the clock to make them fully ready. Some estimates suggested they'd be armed and ready to fire within days, perhaps hours. Behind the scenes, Kennedy and Khrushchev exchanged desperate messages. Khrushchev's first letter was almost rambling, emotional, a man who seemed to understand the catastrophe they were courting. He proposed a deal: remove the missiles from Cuba if America promised never to invade the island. Kennedy and his team saw a glimmer of hope. But then a second letter arrived, harsher in tone, with a new demand. America must also remove its Jupiter missiles from Turkey, positioned near the Soviet border. Had hardliners in Moscow taken control? Was Khrushchev being overruled? October 27th, Black Saturday, everything fell apart. A U-2 spy plane was shot down over Cuba by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson Jr., was killed, the only direct casualty of the crisis, but a casualty that nearly sparked Armageddon. American military leaders demanded retaliation. At the same time, another U-2 accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace over Siberia. Soviet fighters scrambled to intercept it, while American F-102 fighters, armed with nuclear air-to-air missiles, rushed to protect it. One miscalculation, one nervous pilot, and the missiles could fly. Deep underwater, a Soviet submarine designated B-59 was being depth-charged by American destroyers. The submarine's captain and political officer wanted to fire a nuclear torpedo. They thought war had already begun. Only the intervention of Vasily Arkhipov, the submarine's second-in-command who happened to be aboard, prevented the launch. One man's decision may have saved the world. Kennedy knew they were out of time. Robert Kennedy met secretly with Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin. They crafted a deal. The Soviets would remove their missiles from Cuba. The Americans would pledge not to invade Cuba. And quietly, secretly, the U.S. would remove its missiles from Turkey. But this part couldn't be made public, or Khrushchev would look like he'd won concessions under pressure. It was creative diplomacy born of desperation. Kennedy and Khrushchev both needed a way to step back from the edge while saving face with their own hardliners. On October 28th, Radio Moscow broadcast an announcement. Khrushchev had agreed to Kennedy's terms. The missiles would be removed from Cuba. The Soviet ships would turn back. The crisis was over. Around the world, people exhaled. In Washington and Moscow, leaders who hadn't slept properly in nearly 2 weeks finally allowed themselves to rest. Humanity had stared into the abyss and somehow pulled back. In the following months, Soviet missiles were dismantled and shipped back to the USSR. American inspectors verified their removal. the Jupiter missiles quietly disappeared from Turkey. A hotline was established between Washington and Moscow so the two leaders could communicate directly in future crises, no more relying on messages that took hours to decode and deliver. The Cuban Missile Crisis taught the world several critical lessons. First, that nuclear weapons had made war between superpowers unthinkable. Kennedy and Khrushchev both learned that in the nuclear age, there are no winners, only survivors, if you're lucky. Second, communication matters. Misunderstanding and miscalculation nearly ended the world. The establishment of the hotline was a recognition that leaders needed to talk directly, especially in moments of crisis. Third, cooler heads must prevail. Both Kennedy and Khrushchev faced enormous pressure from military advisors who wanted more aggressive action. Both leaders chose restraint, even when it made them look weak to their own generals. Historians still debate how close we actually came to nuclear war. We now know that there were tactical nuclear weapons in Cuba that Kennedy didn't know about. We know about Vasily Arkhipov's critical decision on submarine B-59. We know that at several points, the use of nuclear weapons was discussed seriously, not as a last resort but as a viable military option. Daniel Ellsberg, a military analyst at the time who helped prepare nuclear war plans, later said the world came so close to nuclear war that it's really a miracle we're still here. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains the closest humanity has come to nuclear war. It shaped Cold War policy for decades. It led to the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It convinced both superpowers that arms control was necessary for survival. For Kennedy, it was his finest hour, though he never lived to see how history would judge him. For Khrushchev, it contributed to his downfall. Soviet hardliners saw the resolution as a defeat and removed him from power 2 years later, 13 days. That's all it took to bring the world to the brink of annihilation. 13 days of secret meetings, military posturing, diplomatic chess moves, and sheer luck. We survived not because of our weapons, but despite them. We survived because two men, for all their flaws and differences, understood that some games are too dangerous to play. The missiles of October are long gone, but the weapons remain, thousands of them, still pointed at cities around the world. The Cuban Missile Crisis isn't just history, it's a warning. In the nuclear age, humanity is always just one crisis, one miscalculation, one nervous decision away from the unthinkable. We came within 13 days of nuclear war once. The question is, will we be as lucky next time?